We all have songs that we like to listen to over and over again. I'm sure some of us can remember the days of the mix tape, spending hours sourcing songs, painstakingly recording them to cassette, or maybe burning them onto CD, homemade compilations of our favourite songs. Probably anyone under the age of 15 won't have a clue about some of the efforts that the rest of us had to go through. Today, with the rise of Spotify, other music streaming platforms, it's all about the playlist. It's simpler than ever to create and share playlists. And you even have politicians today, celebrities, sharing their playlists online for people to follow. But what if I were to tell you, and I say it reverently, that you could access God's playlist? Or what if you could access and sing the very songs that Jesus sang? The songs that filled his life. His road trip songs, you might even say. Because that's what the Psalms are, aren't they? They're God's mix tape. Christ's playlist. 150 tracks. And as we begin this morning a new series on the Psalms, we're doing so looking at a little group within the Psalter. They serve as a little playlist of their own. 15 of them, 15 songs for the road. You could say a road trip playlist. Alec Motier, an expert in the Old Testament, has put it this way: this is possibly the loveliest, most exquisite group of psalms. A strong statement. One of the loveliest and most exquisite groups of psalms. Psalms 120 through to 134. You might be able to see in your Bibles, they all have the same title. A Song of Ascents. These psalms, it's generally thought, they were sung by the people of God as they travelled from all over to the city of Jerusalem for the 3 annual feasts, 3 main feasts every year. And since the temple was in Jerusalem, that's where everyone went. And it wasn't an easy journey. It wasn't a straightforward journey. Jerusalem stands on a hill about 800 meters above sea level. So similar, actually, in elevation to Slieve Donard, really. And no matter what direction you were approaching Jerusalem, you were always going up. You were always literally going up to Jerusalem. Hence, these songs of ascents, these going up songs. And as pilgrims made their way from all over, they sang. This was their playlist. Hence, the title for this series of sermons, The Pilgrim's Playlist. The Bible often describes the Christian life as a journey, as a walk, or a race even, a path that has been marked out for us. We too are pilgrims, travellers, travelling towards a great city, a heavenly city, travelling to the New Jerusalem even. You might think of John Bunyan famously capturing this whole idea in The Pilgrim's Progress. And what a tremendous kindness of God to give us a soundtrack for the journey. A pilgrim's playlist, songs for us to sing in the walk of faith. Songs that perfectly capture and express the onward, upward progression in the life of faith. And track number 1 is before us this morning, Psalm 120. And it's perhaps not an obvious choice for setting off on a journey. This is not an upbeat song. It isn't very joyful, really, Psalm 120. If anything, it's a little heavy. It's quite sad. There's a gloom to Psalm 120. I don't think many would choose this as their favourite psalm. Yet I hope we'll see this is a perfect opening track here. This is all about longing to be elsewhere. It's all about wanting to be home, wanting to get home. It describes a homesick man of faith, a woman of faith even, a Christian homesick for heaven. Homesick for heaven. We have 4 points we want to pull out to help us through this psalm this morning. So let's see firstly, considering the homesick Christian. Considering the homesick Christian. We could skip forward to verse 5 in the psalm, and we find the psalmist's address, his postcode even. Woe to me that I sojourn in Meshech, that I dwell among the tents of Kedar. Now, Meshech and Kedar, they were remote places, obscure places to the people of God. Meshech, northwest of Israel, an area really in modern-day Turkey. Kedar to the southeast, an area today in Saudi Arabia. And it's not that the psalmist literally lived in these two places at once. That would be physically impossible. But remember, this is poetry. And he's using these terms to describe just how alienated, how cut off he's feeling. He feels so isolated that he might as well be in Meshech or Kedar. Some people might describe it today as being in Timbuktu or Siberia, just places that seem so far away. He feels so distant from the Lord, from God's people even. But it's not just the geography that's troubling him. It's the society. It's the whole philosophy of life all around him. His problem is really with the people around him. He describes verse 2, his specific trouble. Verse 2, deliver me, O Lord, from lying lips, from a deceitful tongue. You see, he's surrounded by liars. By liars. And this is so relevant, friends, so up to date. Our society today is in a state of utter decline and disarray because of this same issue, is it not? Lying lips, deceitful tongues. People have rejected the truth of God and they have embraced what? A lie. We see it in the transgender movement. We see it in the abortion lobby. We see it behind the whole same-sex marriage agenda. We see it in end-of-life issues as well. We're living in a culture that is destroyed and devaluing truth. Truth today is whatever you want it to be. People talk about my truth, your truth, and it's nonsense. It's farcical. People talk about being true to themselves, and it's everywhere. We see it in the murky world of politics. Lying lips, deceitful tongues. And we see it on social media. We see it in the staff room. We see it in the classroom. We see it in the playground. We see it in the farmyard. We see it in the home. And we see it even in the church. People gossiping. People slandering. People lying. People falsely accusing. And it's troubling this man. And that's not all that's troubling him. There's outright hostility as well. There's anger, not just words, but there's heat, there's anger. Verse 7, I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. And again, we look at the world, and it's very, very similar, isn't it? It is an incredibly hostile place. There's no neutrality to the gospel. And there's hostility, especially so to the people of God. And it's in the midst of this world the Christian longs for peace. Just note the word peace there. It's a beautiful word, shalom. And it's more than just absence of conflict, but it includes positive things. The positive presence of health and wholeness. So this psalmist is a person of peace. He longs for real peace, lasting peace. But he lives among people who hate peace. People who hate the very idea of shalom. They don't want anything to do with real peace, lasting peace, inner peace, complete peace. And again, that's our experience, isn't it? We are for peace, gospel peace. So many people around us, they don't want to hear. They don't want to hear. They don't want anything about it. And all of that feeds into verse 6. When we hear this psalmist, too long have I had my dwelling among those who hate peace. It's interesting, we often have the phrase, how long, in the Psalms. This is the only time we find too long. The only time, too long have I lived here, he says. He's tired of it all. How about you this morning? How about you? Can you relate to this psalm writer? As we thought with the children, this world is not meant to be our forever home. Our citizenship, Paul puts it, is in heaven. And as Christians, we should have this kind of homesickness, this kind of longing to be in heaven. Right now, it's as if we dwell in Meshach, Kedar. We're surrounded by falsehood and hostility, but we should be longing to be with the Lord. And if this morning, if this does not remotely describe your life, that could be an indication of something wrong spiritually with you. And perhaps you need to consider whether heaven really is your true home. Maybe you've begun to set your affections more on Meshach, on Kedar. It was Jesus who said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Maybe you've become too invested, too interested, too tied up with Meshach, with Kedar. So that's the first thing this morning, considering the homesick Christian. Can you relate? The homesick Christian. Secondly then, counselling the homesick Christian. Counselling this homesick Christian. How does this psalm counsel those who are homesick for heaven? Let me suggest two things. Firstly, go to God. Verses 1 and 2. Go to God. Normally, when we face lies or deception or dishonesty, we usually complain to someone else first, don't we? I can't believe they said that about me. That was an outright lie, you might say. Look at this psalmist. Rather than running to others, rather than complaining to others, where does he go? He brings it all to the Lord. First, verse 1, in my distress, I complained, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. Verse 2, deliver me, O Lord, from lying lips, from a deceitful tongue. Heaven is his first port of call. When you stand back a little just to think of this, these words, they should astonish us, friends. They should amaze us. That when you pray, that when you take your complaints to the Lord, he hears your complaints. Boys and girls, I want you to remember that this morning. God hears you when you pray. God hears you when you pray. That is amazing. That the God who created the universe, the God who's bigger than the universe, that when you pray, he pays attention to you. James 5:13. Is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Let him pray. Go to the Lord. Go to God. That's his first item of counsel. But then the psalmist would say, secondly, wait for God. Wait for God. Verses 3 and 4. These verses are a little darker, actually, verses 3 and 4. He turns from addressing God to addressing these liars all around him. Verse 3. What shall be given to you? And what more shall be done to you, you deceitful tongue? In other words, what are you going to receive? What's coming to you? And the answer, verse 4. A warrior's sharp arrows with glowing coals of the broom tree. In other words, nothing less than the just judgment of God. Do you see him? He's praying here. And then rather than taking matters into his own hands, he's leaving it with the Lord. It's as if he says, I'm going to let you deal with this, God. And God's response isn't going to be pleasant. It's not going to be rosy, is it? A warrior's sharp arrows. That describes something of the suddenness, surely, of God's judgment. When it comes, it will be sudden. It speaks of the skill, the accuracy, the sharpness, the intensity of it. You can be certain he will not miss. A warrior's sharp arrows. And then the glowing coals of the broom tree. Well, this tree was known for its exceptionally hard wood. It produced extremely hot charcoal, apparently, this tree. Charcoal that sort of retained its heat for a long time. So if arrows and speak about the suddenness of the judgments, well, these long burning coals, surely they speak of the span of the judgment, its duration. It will be fierce in blazing and slow in burning. These verses, they should frighten the unbeliever. But they should reassure the Christian. God will punish every sin. It means that when you are attacked by others, you don't need to attack back. You don't need to give in turn. Romans 12:19. Beloved, never avenge yourselves. Never avenge yourselves. But leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. Go to God and then wait for God. When homesick Christian, when people attack you, you pray for deliverance. You pray for your persecutors. You take it to the cross of Jesus and you leave it there. Go to God and wait for God, counseling the homesick Christian. Then a word, thirdly, about challenging the homesick Christian. Challenging the homesick Christian. This writer is just longing to be with God's people. He's longing to be with God. But he's not a recluse. He is not hiding away in a monastery. He isn't clustered away in his study. He's not seeking cover underground even. He's in the world. He's not of the world, but he's in the world. And this raises a couple of challenges to homesick Christians. So, verse 2, we must watch our lips. As we see this writer living in the world, not of the world, a couple of challenges for us. We must watch our lips. Verse 2. And that prayer in verse 2 is clearly a prayer that God would deliver him from the malice of people around him. Deliver me, O Lord, from lying lips. But can we not also see in this little prayer request the commitment of this man that he will not speak this way either? Deliver me from those lips. I don't want to have those kind of lips, Lord. I don't want to speak the way that they do. Deliver me, O Lord, from lying lips, from a deceitful tongue. It's a bit like Peter's instruction, 1 Peter 3, 15 and 16. In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior may be put to shame. Do you see? No matter how threatened, no matter how alienated, no matter how slandered you are, we must not hate, and we must not slander, and we must not malign, and we must not mock those who oppose us. Colossians 4:6. Let your speech always be gracious. Let your speech always be gracious. There's a challenge to the homesick Christian. Watch your lips. Watch your lips. A second challenge. We must use our lips. We must use our lips. A few years ago, our family, we had the tremendous opportunity of visiting Australia. I was participating in a pulpit exchange with an RP minister in Melbourne, and it was a fascinating, memorable experience. But to an extent, we always felt like strangers in a distant land. We stood out. We didn't fit in, not so much because of the way we looked, but because of the way we spoke. The way we spoke, and maybe you've had a similar experience. No sooner had we opened our mouths to speak, everybody knew, you don't belong here. You don't belong here. And in a similar way, the Christian, the moment we open our lips, we should be standing out. The moment we use our mouths to speak, it's as if people should know, you don't belong here. This isn't your forever home. Verse 7, I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. The psalmist speaks peace in a hostile, difficult context. It's a challenge, isn't it? To speak out. This psalmist was not a silent man. The Christian must not be silent. You must not live in some kind of bubble-wrapped Christian subculture, safe and protected from the world around you. No, you're to be a public witness. You're to be salt. You're to be light, Jesus said, in contact with the world. You're to speak peace. Ephesians 6, the armor of God, includes shoes fitted with the readiness of the gospel of peace. We're to have this constant readiness to speak about the gospel of peace. So we must use our lips. What a challenge to homesick Christians. watching our lips, using our lips. So this opening track of this playlist, we've been considering the homesick Christian, counselling, challenging, and then fourthly, comforting the homesick Christian. Because while this is a little bit of a sad song, there is comfort in it. There is comfort in it. Sometimes that's the case, actually, with sad songs. Often they bring comfort, whether it's Beethoven or the Beatles or even Bieber. Often people find strange comfort from singing in the minor key. So it is with Psalm 120. And let me mention just again 2 sources of comfort in this song. One, it's not for long. It's not for long. Verse 5 again. Woe to me that I sojourn in Meshach, that I dwell among the tents of Kedar. Notice, he does not say, I live in Meshach. He does not say, I belong to Meshach. He does not say, my home is in Meshach. He says, I sojourn in Meshach. Big difference. This word sojourn has the idea of being a temporary resident, a short-term tenant, if you like. Living as a stranger. This is not his forever home. If you've spent any time in holidays living out of a suitcase, you'll know what it's like to come to this stage and you just want home. You just want home. That's the sense here. Charles Spurgeon comments, thank God for that word sojourn. Thank God for that word sojourn. And even though in the next phrase he says he dwells in Kedar, notice it's a tent he's dwelling in. It's a tent, not a house, not a palace, not a mansion, but a temporary tent. So it's not for long, Christian. How thankful we should be that Jesus didn't say, in my Father's tent are many sleeping bags, but in my Father's house. In my Father's house, many mansions, many rooms. So we sojourn but for a moment in Meshach, in the tents of Kedar, so that forever we will dwell in the house of the Lord. Take comfort in that, Christian. It's not for long. It's not for long. And then also comfort, you're not alone. You're not alone. There is enormous comfort knowing that others are going through the same experiences you're going through in all sorts of walks of life. It's comforting to know that here we have a psalm writer who kind of knows these struggles we have within ourselves. But we do well this morning to think of a singer of this song who knows better than anyone what it is to be homesick for heaven. We're told in Luke chapter 2 about Joseph and Mary, and they made their annual pilgrimage, their journey to Jerusalem for Passover. And alongside them was 12-year-old Jesus. And as they went, these would have been their songs, remember. These songs were his songs. And we need to have that in mind throughout this series. It just helps to illuminate these songs for us. He's the ultimate singer of this psalm. He could sing this song in a way that none of us could. Those words in verse 2, deliver me, O Lord, from lying lips, from deceitful tongues. No one knew the pain of lies more than Jesus. We think of him in his final hours before his death. We're told, many bore false witness against him. Those words in verse 5. Woe to me that I sojourn in Homesick, that I dwell in the tents of Kedar. We're told in John 1 that Jesus came and tabernacled among us. Literally, he pitched his tent among us. Surely this psalm was his psalm. We read those words in verse 7. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. The Prince of Peace, yet despised and rejected of men. He had every right to pray down the judgment of God for sinners. Sinners like you and me. Friends, we're not the innocent in this psalm, by the way. We're not the innocent. We justly deserve the sharp arrows and the glowing coals of these words. If you're not yet a Christian, no matter how decent you might be, your tongue alone condemns you to hell. Your tongue alone condemns you to hell. And so you need to see in this song a great big signpost to Calvary. Because in going to the cross, Jesus suffered that sharp arrow of God's judgment. What did Isaiah say? Pierced for our transgressions. He endured the blazing heat of God's wrath for sinners like you and me. So are you feeling homesick for heaven? Well, consider Jesus. Consider Jesus. If he could have prayerfully sung this psalm, you and I can do so today. Consider him, Hebrews says. Consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. Consider him. Amen.